Good evening and welcome to the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education regular meeting for Wednesday, June 24th, 2020. Has this meeting been properly noticed?
Yes, it has.
Would you please call the roll?
Carlin,
Here.
Evans,
Here.
Warner,
Here.
Herzog,
Here.
Olmsted. Olmsted,
Here.
Heschel,
Here.
Szilagyi.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will move on to our next agenda item, which happens to be the Pledge of Allegiance. And I think Dr. Cartwright is eagerly awaiting to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Cartwright. Moving on, then, the next agenda item is board and administrative reports, starting with the board president's report. I've had the privilege of representing this board at a few meetings since we last met. One of them was the annual CISA 6 Board of Control meeting. This is a meeting, as its name would suggest, where new members of the Board of Control are elected or re-elected on a 3-year rotating basis. And all the districts in the CISA are divided into 3 categories: large, medium, and small. And then there are representatives chosen from each group. I also attended the Joint Review Board meeting, which approves or reviews at least TIF districts. They presented us with an annual financial report. Seems like the TIFs are doing well. There aren't any major ones coming due anytime soon, but stay tuned. There will eventually be monies coming back to the district. I also attended the WASB board meeting. To me, one of the most significant components of that meeting was that we reviewed a draft called WASB Statement on Education's Role in Fighting Racial Injustice. And we had a good conversation about that relative to what's been going on in our country over these last few weeks. This document is going to be sent to all school districts in the state. And some of the conversations suggested that it was important that we do more than send this letter, as we've discussed on similar issues or issues that we think are important as a board, that we do more than just send a letter, but we do some follow-up and we recommend actions to be taken. So there is a task force that is made up of volunteer members of the WASB board. I have volunteered to be part of that in order to take a look not only at racial inequities, but also those related to our students who are special needs, students living in poverty, LGBTQ students, and that we make sure that we are attuned to diversity and inclusion. And I know Dr. Cartwright and others were cited in a recent news article in the Oshkosh Northwestern relative to the work being done in this district as we begin year 3 of that process to look at equity. I also attended a WASB meeting on the January convention planning. Just as we and 420 other school districts are talking about preparing to welcome people face to face in the fall, they are also talking about that. No plans have been determined at this point because there are so many variables. But again, I would say stay tuned. It might be that it's an all virtual convention. It might be a hybrid, or it might be face to face, but with provisions for social distancing. And finally, I had received a call last Friday from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards. They were looking for a couple of school board presidents to represent the association as well as their own school districts at a public hearing today for the Assembly Committee on Education led by Representative Jeremy Thiesfeld out of the Fond du Lac area. So I presented an overview of some of the complexities, challenges, and costs involved with opening up our schools for face-to-face learning in the fall. And I had an opportunity to listen to other presenters as well. There were about 8 education groups who were invited to attend. So it was my pleasure to and privilege to represent you at all of these meetings. So with that, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is the superintendent's report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Herzog. We're going to go ahead and get started right away. Lisa Duxbury, an Oshkosh Area School District literacy coach, was recently recognized by the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction for serving as a chairperson on the writing committee that revised the Wisconsin Standards for English Language Arts. Her appointment as a chair recognizes her expertise in literacy, her commitment to her profession, and her leadership skills. We are so grateful for her efforts at the state level and right here in our own district. Wisconsin was recently chosen as one of 5 states to participate in the Supporting State and Local Outcomes Data Use Early Childhood Cohort. In fact, our district's very own early childhood team will be serving as the local education agency partner, led by Lisa Brule, again, an Oshkosh Area School District program support teacher. We are excited to be a part of this work, which we hope will lead to using Indicator 7 child outcomes data for both policymaking at the state level and for early childhood programming at the LEA level, all with a focus on improved outcomes for young learners with IEPs. This June, Reed Elementary students were able to take part in virtual math camp. The 4-week virtual math camp included 3 different sessions and allowed students to have fun with math while focusing on lagging math skills. Before graduating from Oshkosh West High School, the class of 2020 wanted to once again recognize and show their appreciation for the Oshkosh Police Department and its commitment to school safety. Due to COVID-19, the initial appreciation plans needed to be modified, and a virtual plaque presentation recently took place instead. The plaque features Officer Mike Wissing's police badge number and will be displayed in the main entrance of Oshkosh West High School as a symbol of gratitude, as well as a reminder that Oshkosh West is a safe place thanks to the tireless efforts of the Oshkosh Police Department and local law enforcement and response agencies. And on the scene, you'll see just a few examples of what has been consuming my time lately. Most of it, as you can see, or at least since our last board meeting, have been a lot about Zoom meetings. So many of these are repetitive, but rather than putting them on there multiple times, it just may say the word meetings in plurality. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and see if there's anything at this point in time before turning it over to Dr. Herzog. We do not have any district administrator supplemental reports. So Dr. Herzog.
Thank you, Dr. Cartwright. Are there any committee reports tonight from any of the board committee chairs? I don't think there were, maybe there was one meeting since we last met. I can't remember.
Yeah, I have one, Barb.
All right, Mr. Evans, great.
The legislative committee meeting met Thursday, June 11th, the day after the long board meeting. On the agenda was a legislative update. We talked about the legislative hearing that was held on Wednesday, June 10th, which focused mainly on safe reopening of K-12 schools. Discussion centered around what it might look like and what challenges were anticipated in the typical 3,700 student school district. It was estimated that there would be a 1.8 million in additional costs after following all the CDC requirements. Dr. Cartwright added that the costs referred to in the hearing included digital devices, which thanks to our first referendum, we already have those in hand. We had a discussion on the legislative committee itself. I stated that I attended the June Policy and Governance Committee meeting to discuss possible updates for this policy. After some discussion, the group decided that goals of the committee should be created as part of a legislative action plan. Dr. Cartwright recommended a board workshop to determine what items should be a focus for the upcoming year, as well as their prioritization. I see that's on our calendar for sometime in August. What started out, June started out as a really busy month, has grinded to a halt because we were going to be meeting every Thursday, and after the first two, we decided that nothing really is pressing. So we're going to meet next on August 27th, unless something would come up where we needed to call a quick meeting. So as it stands right now, our next meeting will be on August 27th.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Are there any other committee reports? All right. Even though we are meeting virtually, we do provide for public input in both a non-agenda related public forum and an agenda related public forum. The public is invited to complete a form and return that by 5 o'clock on the day of our meeting, and the statement will be read to the public at that time. We did not receive any forms for tonight for either non-agenda or for agenda related. So we will move on to the next agenda item, which is a workshop, facilities and operational referenda discussion with Dr. Gunlock, Mrs. Schnorr, and others.
Good evening, everybody. I am joined by obviously Sue Schnorr, Executive Director of Business Services, but also Clint Selly from Bray Architects, and I'll be running the presentation, but Clint will be starting it. I'll be discussing the operational referendum. Clint will talk about the capital referendum. I'll give a little information on an update from some input that we received from O4E last week. And then Drew Nehans, our new Executive Director of Business Services, will provide some information on a sample ballot and tax impact. And then obviously we'll open it up for questions. So I'll turn it over to Clint.
Thank you very much, Dave. I am at home and with the hopefully avoiding my children chiming in on the board meeting. I'm using headphones for the first time. So
Clint, I apologize. We're going to interrupt you. We cannot hear you well. We hear you, but it is very, very shallow.
I was trying headphones for the first time. Is that better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. My children might chime in at some point. I'm working from home tonight, so I was trying to avoid that with the headphones. Thank you again for allowing us to present this evening. Additionally, with me is Matt Wolfert, also from Bray Architects. So we wanted to go through, obviously last time we presented about 2 weeks ago, it was a lot of information. And some really great comments. So tonight's presentation is intended to provide a little bit more overview, address, I think, some of your pressing questions, in particular, the question of why now, which is, I think, the most critical thing the district is going to be grappling with over the coming few weeks or month or so. We wanted to just provide a little bit of background information. So the state of Wisconsin referendum information. I believe we touched on this a little bit last time, but just a reminder, the school district is allowed, or a school district is allowed 2 ballot questions during a calendar year. Most often districts go during a primary, which is the April election, or a general election, which is November. The November general elections typically only happen on even years. There was a odd year November election several years back during the Scott Walker recall election cycle. You do have the opportunity to go in February or August during a pre-primary. However, most districts tend to avoid those due to low voter turnout, and just kind of they're inconsistent. There isn't always a February or August pre-primary. So sometimes there's the sense that you're trying to sneak something by the community if you go during those times. So again, keeping in mind that a general election or a primary election are really kind of the best ones to target in terms of having the best voter turnout. The next possible opportunities are November 3rd, which is our presidential. From there, we move to April 6th, 2021. And again, then in 2021, there is not a November election. So from April 2021, the following election then would be on April of 2022. So again, providing a little bit of context there. The second item is, again, types of school referendum. So really the district, as it sits right now, is considering two different types of referenda. One is an operational referenda and one is a capital referendum. The verbiage below here kind of describing the difference between the two was actually some of the verbiage we used on the community survey that went out in this past fall. Again, an operational tends to fund programs and services, and a capital referendum is a issuance of debt, typically for a bricks and mortar style project. So the example there would be Oak Lawn Elementary was a previous capital referendum that the district undertook. So starting out with the operational referendum, there's actually two components to that the district is considering as well. So I'm going to kind of turn things back over to Dave now, and Dave's going to kind of go through what is part of the operational consideration.
Thanks, Clint. Most of the information we're going to be presenting here is somewhat of a repeat of what we presented on the 10th. We felt it would be wise to give a summary, sort of a recapping of everything that was presented on the 10th. And one of the main things that we talked about with regards to the operational referendum was the fact that there's two of them. There was one in 2014 and one in 2016. And more specifically, in 2014, the referendum actually was broken up into two component parts. I guess the part that was the most expensive of it was $2.5 million to protect existing district operations. These were existing programs that have been beneficial to our students for many years. The 1.45 million was to get at a goal the board was really focused on at the time of creating a Learning Without Limits initiative where we began to provide technology access for our students and our staff. And that is how that referendum stayed throughout the entire term from 2014 to present. The other referendum for learning was in 2016, and that really largely is $4 million a year just to protect operations. And I think it's important for people to realize that the reason for these two referenda was Oshkosh was such a low spending district when the revenue limits were put in that it set the stage for that. Also, if we recall, from 2000 to 2010, 5 of those 10 years, the boards at that time had decided to under levy. And so what that left us with was a very thin margin to deal with things. And especially when there's no cost of living change in district budgets, it forced the district into having a shortfall of approximately $4 million. So that's where the 2016 referendum for learning came in. Now, when we talk about the Learning Without Limits initiative, really what did that $1.45 million go to? It went to these 4 phases, creating a state-of-the-art infrastructure that has been necessary as we've fed the devices that we provided to staff and students. Phase 2 was providing for teacher support through embedded professional development. Phase 3 was providing staff members with access to technology prior to giving it to students. And that turned out to be one of the smartest decisions that was made at that time. And then phase 4 was going through the sequence of providing students with devices. We were very fortunate to have access to this at our at-home learning time. It's not inaccurate to say we literally would have had to shut down education without having that in place. So that was very, very important for us. We realized the shortcoming to that, as you can see on the screen, is it stopped at grade 3. And the board at the meeting in May approved the addition of about 2,100 devices that will allow us to go to K-12. So that's a big benefit. The budget reconciliation work was a key part in 2014 and 2016. In 2014, they went through and created what we called a cut list at the time, that what would have to happen if the referendum did not pass. That was refreshed in 2016 and updated, and you see some screenshots from that. The Facility Advisory Committee, which was a representative committee that included everybody from staff to students to community members, business owners, et cetera. They went through that entire list, and you can see the green on there was sort of the first round, the first $4 million of those reductions. It is safe to say that those reductions were severe and would have made Oshkosh an outlier in the Valley as well as the state. They did a really, really great job of also rank ordering them. And to sort of summarize what they talked about, none of these were things that they wanted to do. And they encouraged the board at that time to go to referendum, both in 2014 and then yet again in 2016. And we were very successful at both of those opportunities. Now, rather than kind of rehash the reduction list all again, we felt it was more important to talk about what were the supports that were put in place with those very generous dollars that we received from the taxpayers, and what were the main themes around those. And forgive me, I dislike reading from a slide, just like anybody does, but I think it's important for us to realize these are some of the key areas of support. These were some of the positive things that we were able to do with those resources. So first off, encourage families to live in Oshkosh by providing students with a personalized, comprehensive, and competitive set of learning opportunities. Leverage high quality staff to continue to develop their talents and skills. Ensure we remain competitive while focusing expenses on staff growth. Number 3, support classroom instruction and up-to-date resources. Number 4, provide students with a personalized and comprehensive set of learning opportunities to prepare them to lead in the future. Number 5, ensure teachers have adequate time to prepare state-of-the-art lessons and work individually with students. Number 6, provide administrative supports necessary to meet increasing student needs as well as increasing community expectations. Number 7, provide the same opportunities to participate in athletics as any other district in our region or the state. Number 8, compensate staff based on market rates that we found in surrounding districts to decrease turnover in our classrooms. If you'll recall, that was a very significant issue in 2014 and then again in 2016. Number 9, provide reasonable class sizes so teachers have the opportunity to individualize education for increasingly diverse student needs. And number 10, provide a sustainable and modern infrastructure focused on long-term maintenance and ensure we are not deferring costs into the future. So these 10 core areas of support really could be wrapped up into 3 different themes. 1 was ensuring student opportunity. Number 2, providing quality staff. And number 3, providing robust infrastructure and support. Coincidentally, these were also linked to 3 core areas of our existing strategic plan, goals 1, 3, and 4. And while these actually touch almost every aspect of the strategic plan, they did flow quite seamlessly. So even in 2014 and 2016, our community on numerous occasions has recognized that we need to ensure student opportunity. So students in Oshkosh not only are they not at a disadvantage, but they're at an advantage attending our school system. Number 2, providing quality staff. You need to compensate staff fairly and make sure that they have appropriate professional development to make Oshkosh a place where they choose to work, live, and play. And number 3, providing the robust infrastructure and support. Nothing that we've been able to do since March could occur without robust infrastructure and support. And I can tell you that Oshkosh is viewed as a leader among the state in terms of providing technology resources to students and doing it the right way. So kudos to the board and kudos to the Oshkosh community for leading in advance of this crisis. So the next steps that we really need to think about is determine how we're going to replace the first one, and the second one. And remember, the community's told all of us over the past few years, going to referendum every 2 years is not only difficult, it's challenging and it's damaging. And the community said, no, we don't want to go every so many years, wrap these two together. So that has been an important piece of one of the recommendations that we're going to be bringing to you. Obviously, Clint did a wonderful job of pointing out when we can go to referendum. There are far greater restrictions on you as a school board and us as a school system on when we can go to referendum than used to be in the years past. And those were laid out appropriately before. It's also important to understand that without this support, the district would need to reduce the budget starting as early as the 21-22 school year, and then yet again in 23-24. So that is a wrap up of the operational referendum need that we have going forward. And you'll see that in a ballot question, a sample ballot question we'll be sharing at the end of this presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Clint.
Thank you, Dave. So much like the operational referendum did potentially have two components within it, the capital referendum that we are considering would potentially have 4 components within it. So again, just to kind of clarify, it's 2 separate questions that would potentially appear either in April, or I'm sorry, in November or April, or however you decide to split it up, a capital question and an operational question. And then within each of those, there are different components that we're considering within that. Next slide, Dave. Again, kind of condense the discussion down a little bit as a reminder for those of you that weren't part of the presentation a couple of weeks ago. Again, the district went through a pretty lengthy process to get to where we are today in terms of a facility study, evaluation of that, a facility advisory committee process that was done in last fall, a community survey process that was also done. And again, coming out of that process, we looked at a master plan pathway to condense the school district from 20 buildings down to what was called pathway option B, which would get us to 14 buildings. So that, looking at that, we also broke that into a phased process where phase 1 addresses the elementary schools on the north side as well as the middle schools on the north side. So here's kind of our narrative overall, kind of describing the parts and pieces for a new middle school at the Merrill site and a new elementary school at the Webster site to serve the north side students. Merrill, Webster, and Washington in their current configuration would be taken offline, and then most of the students going to the new elementary school at the Webster site, with some rebounding occurring to send some students to Cook, Reed, and Oak Lawn. The future of Washington would then be determined. That site wouldn't necessarily be demolished. The Merrill and Webster schools would be demolished to accommodate the new construction. So again, phase 1 includes the 2 elementary, or the elementary school and the middle school, as well as some infrastructure projects and safety security projects. So quickly summarizing kind of all 4 components that would be part of a capital referendum question. The first piece is infrastructure updates. Again, a brief summary of what's all included or considered as part of this. There's HVAC work, electrical service upgrades at both high schools, some fire alarm upgrades at a number of the facilities, electrical generator replacement, and some roofing work, again, totaling about $9.3 million. District-wide safety and security improvements. We looked really at solutions for all of the district buildings. There were a number of the buildings, Merrill and Webster in particular, just due to the fact of how large those buildings are, where they're constructed on the site, how they're constructed on the sites, and just due to some of the limitations with dealing with different level changes and those types of things, there were some challenges trying to fully create and accommodate safety security in some of those instances. Again, kind of further reinforcing also just the need at those facilities and some of the long-term challenges for those facilities. So again, we did review all of the buildings and identified projects at each of the facilities. The items that the schools that you see in the gray, we are not considering as part of this process. Again, Merrill, Webster, and Washington will be replaced. So the need for that work is not required anymore. Some of the other facilities, Roosevelt, Shapiro, and Tipler, as we look further out into the phasing, those buildings would likely come offline then as part of a later phase project. So the recommendation would be not to spend money on those now, knowing that they would come offline in the future. So again, the total safety security is about $9 million, $8.99 million. The district or the board members should have received kind of the plans of all of the facilities. We're just going to kind of highlight a couple different scenarios just so you kind of have a sense of what the overall goals for the safety security projects are. The first example is at Reed Elementary. The area that's shown in the red or pink color is where the current office is within the facility. So it's kind of located in the center of the school. And one of the goals in school construction now is to pull the entry and the offices out to the front of the building. So we are restricting and controlling the visitors coming into the building and just having better supervision in general of the exterior of the facility. So at Reed, the plan is to construct an addition that will house the offices, a new secure entry, which will direct people into the office before being admitted into the building. And then the red or the pink section of the current office will be renovated to allow space for staff and student service spaces like a sensory style room. At South Park, the office currently is on the exterior area of the building. However, just due to the configuration of the office, people still kind of have free reign of the building once they get inside. So while it is in a great spot, the configuration just does not work quite right. So the plan here is to renovate the office in its current location, renovate the vestibule area correspondingly, and again, allow the ability to restrict and control the flow of people through the office first before they're allowed into the building. The last two examples are North and West High School. So starting with North High School, the diagram on the left-hand side is the overall floor plan. So the concept is a new addition out at the entrance kind of that leads you to the gym and cafeteria of the school. So really kind of creating a new front door to the building. Again, pulling the offices from the center part of the building to the exterior. This works really well, I think, from a number of different factors. It still allows the offices to really be part of the academic area or have a connection to the academic area while also being part of that front door sequence. I should say that in all of the cases for all of these plans, we've had several meetings with the principals and some school staff to work through some of the solutions. So in this case, the principals had some good input on the number of offices, the number of conference rooms, and some of those types of areas to make sure that we're properly supporting them. And then here's the plan on the right, then again, is kind of the expanded version. The current office area then would be renovated for some student spaces, some collaborative spaces, some classroom spaces, as well as in-school suspension area. And then the last example is West High School. So West would again represent a renovation option where we would just move and reconfigure some of the spaces around, primarily around kind of where the library exists. So Dave, if you want to go to the next plan, it's kind of an expanded version of it. The office currently exists to the left across the corridor from the library. And the idea is to move the main office area out to the front of the building, again, to create the secure entry vestibule. So the kind of the pink square at the bottom of the plan would represent that new main office. The red or the pink square on the right side of the plan would be converting existing classrooms to guidance and student services. And then the current classrooms that are there would move over again to the space currently occupied by the offices and student service area. So moving on then to the new elementary school, and I have to be brave tonight. The principals did a wonderful job presenting this at the last meeting. But again, we wanted to make sure that we got really good feedback from the principals in helping to shape and set some objectives for these buildings. So the items on here are some of the things that were really important to them as we move down this process to make sure that we accommodated these within the designs. I'll just highlight a couple. Again, safety security is one of the main things that we're trying to do across the board. I think the idea, again, of these schools having a school within a school feel. These are our younger learners. And while this will be a 600 student elementary school, we really want it to feel like a intimate and smaller learning environment. So when we see the floor plans, you'll see some of the strategies we use to make sure the students feel like they're part of a smaller community within the building and have easy access to the spaces that they go to. Again, within the building, there's the ability for lots of collaboration between staff, between students. And again, the close proximity to allow that to occur. Strategic placement of the office and media center, again, making sure those really are at the hub of the building, easily accessible and kind of really part of the front of the building. Playground equipment, that was really important even coming out of the facility advisory committee. And then making sure our critical staff are available and in key locations within the building to serve the students adequately. We first start with the boring architecture, which is kind of the spreadsheet architecture. We want to make sure all of those goals are represented by a space. So we start out first with a building program, which identifies the type of space, the number of spaces that we have, and as well as some notes and goals for these. Ultimately, we're trying to get to an overall square footage, which we anticipate this building will be, which is right around 118,000 square feet. From here, we wanted to test that out on our given sites. So starting out with the Webster site for the potential new elementary. Dave, you want to advance? Again, the word concept on here, this is just an initial plan that we have, again, worked with the principals and the exec team to start to develop and really kind of test those goals and try to make those objectives work on the site. I think as we're looking at the site, one of the most critical things we're looking at is the traffic flow, our ability to separate the parent drop-off areas from the bus drop-off areas. In this case, starting off of on the sort of the left-hand side or the west side off of Grove Street, there's our parking lot with a parent drop-off loop located around that. That sort of feeds into the playground area. So again, students having the ability for plenty of outdoor space. We have a second drop-off loop along Melvin that's actually is an existing condition, so we will continue to utilize that. So plenty of different places for students to get dropped off. Hazel Street really is kind of what we consider to be the front of the building. The park is right across the street, and then the lake is further to the right of that. So really kind of the marquee view of the site. So we really want to make sure the building fronts that. We have lots of rooms that are able to hopefully see the lake or experience the lake from the building and really just create a really unique environment for what's a great site. Off of Hazel is also our parking for visitors, as well as a little drop-off area for accessing the front door, the secure entry area of the building. And then off of Seward Trail is a staff parking lot, a small staff parking lot, as well as our bus drop-off area. Moving on to the floor plan. So on the left is the first floor, on the right is the second floor. Hopefully you can kind of start to see how we broke down the massing of the building to create kind of smaller environments for each of the grade levels. The corridor kind of running north-south is kind of what we would kind of consider to be Main Street for the building, and really the path that most students will utilize going from their different classroom wings to the cafeteria, to the gymnasium, art, music, library, and some of those other spaces. Each of the grades then is clustered into a wing. So first grade will kind of have their own contained area with access to their lockers or cubbies, their bathrooms, special ed spaces, sensory spaces. And then again, from there, they simply just need to move down that Main Street corridor to access their other support spaces. Similarly, second grade, pre-K, again, trying to create these smaller environments where the students are really only moving along a fairly small path within the building, and they have their own sense of place within the building as well. Again, third, fourth, and fifth grade then are on the second floor. Moving on then to the new middle school, again, starting with our design objectives here, again, developing these in concert with input from the principals. Again, safety security being a very important feature that we need to address within these facilities. And once again, the idea of smaller learning communities. So the middle school is going to be designed to accommodate roughly 900 students. And the goal would be, if there's 3 grade levels, there's 300 students per grade level, and to break that up then into 150 student grade level teams. Again, once we get to the floor plan, you'll see how that is organized. We also organize the grades per on floors. So the academic wing is a 3-story building. So each grade level represents a different, or each level of the building represents a different grade. 21st century learning was really important as we went through this process, and again, kind of distilling that down into flexible spaces as well as spaces that can be utilized for specialized learning. So small group instruction. Rooms are kind of like conference rooms that are flexible. They can be used with small groups of or small teams of students, or to make up a test, or to meet with different specialists or aides. Again, one of the benefits of a school of this size is that there will be full-time specialists dedicated to the staff and students. And much like the elementary design, we really tried to design the administration and pupil services areas to be centrally located along that Main Street corridor and easily accessible by students on a daily basis. And then finally, again, very community friendly and oriented with regard to the playground equipment, meeting spaces, and the gymnasium space. Much like the elementary, again, starting out with a building program, ultimately getting to a square footage about 181,000 square feet or 182,000 square feet, which then we tested out on the site. So the Merrill site, on the left-hand side is kind of our overall site, and then the right-hand side of this is just the zoomed-in version where the building footprint would sit. So starting in the left-hand image, the lower right corner of that, where it shows 2 soccer fields, is the location of the current Merrill Middle School. So the plan in this case would be to build the new middle school in the upper left quadrant, currently where the track and some of the athletic fields are. That would allow us to keep the current Merrill Middle School functioning during the duration of construction, and also while the duration of the elementary school construction. And then once those are complete, we can demolish the existing Merrill building and then convert that to athletic fields. So the site works as a great setting for the building to be located in the upper quadrant, locate parking just to the south of that, and that parking can support both the public functions and day-to-day functions of the school, as well as potential parking for the fields. Again, keeping in mind the drop-off loops, so kind of looking at the right image, Nevada would be our bus drop off, and then parent drop off would be along Kentucky Street, with Kentucky Street really being our front door of the building. Now we're good, Dave. Our floor plan concept, again, first floor, second floor, third floor from left to right. The first floor and kind of the upper section would be our sixth grade, our two teams of sixth grade. So they would be split between the two pods. They're shown on the left-hand side. And then that north and south corridor running through the entire building kind of forms the main street, where at the top, art and STEM classrooms would be available up there. Moving down through where the office and student services occupy, through the cafeteria, down to the gymnasium, and then finally the band, orchestra, and choir wing. Again, with all of these floor plans, we haven't quite designed and identified every single space within the building. So for example, between band and orchestra, you can kind of see a block of space that's a little bit unidentified. But that would be a spot where the practice rooms, the storage rooms, the offices, and those types of things will eventually be designed with input from the staff during the duration of the design phase for the project. And then seventh grade's on the second floor, and eighth grade it would be on plan for the third floor. So our phase one budget summary, that would be inclusive of the of a potential capital referendum, totals about 107 million, or totals 107 million. Just kind of want to point out again, the budget is intended to be a holistic budget. So this does include things like playground equipment, which again was identified as a priority at the FAC level, as well as at the principal level. It also includes some allocation for demolition of the existing buildings, allocation for asbestos abatement, for some technology within the facilities. So again, we're trying to create a very holistic budget that represents the cost for those facilities. Again, keeping in mind that the construction for these, in particular the elementary school, is a few years out. So we also did include some inflation costs onto this to get us out to that date and have some a bit of leeway for changes and swings in the market as we go forward. Again, with regard to schedule then, the first projects that would get completed would be the district-wide safety, security, and infrastructure projects. Those would, the construction for those would occur over the course of 2 summers. So the first phase of work would happen in the summer of 2021, and the second phase of work would happen over the course of the spring and summer of 2022. In terms of the new facilities, the new middle school and the new elementary school, like we mentioned, the plans are very conceptual at this point. So we have a really long design period to meet with staff and really appropriately design these buildings to meet the district needs. So construction doesn't really start on the new middle school until spring of 2022, with completion for August of 2023. And then the elementary school would follow behind that, with construction starting shortly thereafter in August of 2023 and completion for August of 2024. When the elementary school is complete, then there would be some final work at the current Merrill Middle School site, where again we would demolish and restore that site. So again, a lot of that was repeat information from the last presentation. So one of the big kind of takeaways from our last discussion was the why now. So there was some brainstorming of kind of pros and cons as we look at this potentially. The next 3 slides sort of represent 3 different scenarios. Again, we've talked about the different dates that we can consider going. So this first slide is a consideration of the operational and capital referendums in November. Again, I won't read all of these, I think, again, that we've talked a little bit about the combining the operational into one question going forward to eliminate the need to repeatedly go to referendum. From the construction perspective, again, going in November does allow potentially to lock in the projects at historically low interest rates. We continue to see that in the bond market right now, as well as potentially get in on a competitive bid market, which we anticipate occurring in the next few years, again, due to kind of the slowdown in the overall economy due to COVID. Additionally, as there continues to be needs in those facilities, so it really is kind of a turn left or turn right scenario with some of the older buildings within the district. Construction inflation is approximately 4% per year. So choosing to do nothing in some of these instances still will result in costs, as there's maintenance needs within these facilities. So again, the expectation of potential savings of doing the projects earlier rather than later. In terms of the cons, again, a lot of this is economically driven. It's the challenges of our current environment with regard to communication and limited in-person communication. Is there a potential political climate that overwhelms the message? And then, quite frankly, what does school look like in the fall? Will students be within the buildings or not within the buildings? Another consideration would be to go forward with an operational in November and then go for a capital in April of 2021. Some of the pros and cons from the previous slide also are pertinent here. Again, I think one of the thoughts with the operational in November is it does allow that second opportunity potential in April. So again, within one of the pros. And with regard to the capital referendum, it would allow the district to kind of see where things stand. It will have allowed the district to have a successful start to the school year and again, the support of the community at that particular time. In terms of cons, we've talked about the ballot fatigue and again, kind of the feeling that, the community doesn't necessarily want the district to keep coming back. And then the last scenario would be to go for both the operational and capital in April. Again, I think that the main kind of crux of the pros here in this particular case is just really having more information at that point in time. We'll know more about the economy. We'll know more about the implications of COVID. We'll have had a successful start to the school year in the case for both of these and positive momentum going forward. And again, the ability to better communicate at that particular time. Again, the cons are the risk then if either or both are unsuccessful in April, we're having to wait an entire year. And again, in terms of the capital piece of this, again, we're incurring more inflation costs. We're incurring more maybe short-term maintenance costs in some of these older facilities. From the perspective of the operating, we're potentially seeing some cuts in programming because we're not able to have that successful referendum to continue those funds. So in addition to kind of the pros and cons of the timing and when to go, one of the questions was just from last time was, what is sort of the current climate of the state in regard to supporting school districts. So the first thing we're going to just quickly look at was the referenda results from April this past year. Again, the communities within the state continue to heavily support schools. You can see the number up there that sort of jumps out to me as the 91% passed of the questions asked of school referenda. And again, these were a mixture of both the capital type referendum, in this case where they say issuing debt, they're referring to a capital type referendum versus and also operating referendum. If you go to the next slide, Dave, there's kind of just a nice chart just sort of overviewing them. So there were 28 capital referenda asked, and of those 25 passed. And again, of the operational, in this case, there's non-reoccurring and recurring are both just different styles of operating referenda. And again, quite a bit of success in that regard as well. Here's a bit of a historical chart. The IDs are the capital referendum, and the RRs and the NRs are the operating referendum. So again, within the last 5 or so years, again, communities within the state have been very supportive of referenda. The other thing I mentioned again in the last meeting, and just to provide you with a little bit of data, was so that goes back to April, early April. We were still kind of early in the COVID process. So just a little bit more information. We continue to work with school perceptions on a number of different survey efforts throughout the state. I'm personally working with them on 2 surveys recently. One of them was Westby School District, surveyed from March, and it was concluded in the end of April. So a little bit more data, a little more recent data than the referenda process. Again, Westby doesn't compare very well in terms of size and configuration to Oshkosh, but again, an indication of support within that community. They're looking at about $20 million for their potential capital referenda project. Coincidentally, they're also looking at an operating referendum at the same time. They also saw support on the survey for that. In their case, they're retiring existing debt, so there is a no tax increase. So most communities are very supportive of those type of referendums, and we definitely saw that in the results for this survey. The next district that we look at, again, doesn't necessarily compare in terms of size and configuration to Oshkosh, and I can't say what district this is because their results are not final and have not been shared with the district themselves. The survey actually closed on Monday of this week. But again, a similar situation to Westby, where it was a $23 million referendum that also did not have a tax increase due to pre-existing debt. So again, they are still seeing support very, very heavily in favor of the project. So again, another good indication that in spite of the current conditions, there does seem to be support for school districts within the community. I kind of talked to Bill Foster of School Perceptions in general and just sort of asked, what are you seeing? What takeaways? What can I share with Oshkosh to let them know? And much like my description earlier, he said there really isn't another district where he's working that he would say is another Oshkosh or compares in terms of size and configuration of your district. But he did say again that, it does seem that the 3 things are, as long as there is a well-defined need, it's an easy to understand how you're addressing that need, and the proposal does not financially overburden the taxpayers. And again, that's a bit subjective in each community. That he's seeing support on these recent surveys in this time frame that we're in. Again, he did reiterate the dynamics unique for each community. And, he did list one community he's working in where there was a major employer that had a layoff, and they definitely are not seeing support within that community. So some of those things need to be addressed and considered as you weigh your options.
Okay, thank you, Clint. That was a marathon. Appreciate it. You did a great job with that. One of the things we also wanted to talk about was some input we received from Oshkosh for Education. The district tagline is building community through education, and it's not just a tagline for us, it's how we do business. Whether it be the 2012 referendum that built Oak Lawn Elementary, or the 2014 or 2016 referendum for learning, those all started by addressing the community and asking them what they wanted to see from their school system. One of the groups that has helped us the most has probably been Oshkosh for Education, which we refer to as O4E. It's a group of people from all walks of Oshkosh that are very supportive of education and want to see the Oshkosh Area School District be a tailwind for the community, for economic development, and making Oshkosh a place where people want to live, work, and play. Okay. They've done a wonderful job working with us in terms of getting input from the community and funding us getting some of that input. So we thought it wise to go back to them and ask them, in these unprecedented times, what are they seeing and what can they share with us? So I put some of this together, and we've ran this by them as well. And we actually surveyed them a little bit. So first and foremost, of course, concerns were expressed over the high unemployment and the economic downturn as a result of COVID-19 and what that might do in terms of decisions that voters might make at the ballot box. And that was the first discussion that we had. They referred to the fact that the community is keenly aware of the value of education and the need for schools, and that in some ways, this is their words, not ours, that education may have been taken for granted in the past, and now doing at-home learning, parents are getting a bird's eye view of exactly how this actually works. Another piece they talked about was choosing not to pursue a November referendum or referendums would signal to the community that the needs outlined, both operational and capital, are not as important and could be put on hold. And obviously, especially for the operational referendum, that would be very difficult. Facility needs are not going away, and we need to continue to move forward so people choose to live, work, and play in Oshkosh. Obviously, communities to our north and south are continuing to progress. Our facilities are older than theirs in many cases. So, it's important for us to realize that other communities are moving too. There's an equity component to this discussion, as the East Side schools are among the oldest and serving our most diverse children. In addition, they said doing nothing still represents a significant cost to taxpayers. I think that's something that we missed in the survey. The survey was our first chance to communicate this, so it's totally understandable. You can only do so much in an initial survey, but I do think that was one piece that people didn't really realize. It was either we're going to do the capital project or we're not going to do anything, thinking that that would be zero cost. And as Clint pointed out so effectively, that is not the case. And in fact, that single bullet was the reason that kicked off this whole project to begin with, was the cost associated with maintaining or upgrading our facilities. Other districts surrounding us continue to upgrade facilities, many of which are newer than Oshkosh schools. We should provide specific data on what tax impact would be in years 1 through 4 until we fully made the $107 million in improvements. If you'll remember the schedule that Clint put forward, the new elementary school does not come fully online till 2024. That means that we won't be expending those tax dollars or in the construction phases until later in the cycle. So it will build in over time, of course, but the tax impact the first year is going to be smaller than subsequent years. And lastly, we need to be clear that we know that a lot has changed since our initial community survey in 2019 due to COVID-19. However, we are committed to acting in the best interest of our students and community and ensuring that Oshkosh becomes a destination district. With better schools, economic development in Oshkosh will also improve. So that was paraphrasing what we heard from O4E a short time ago. We also surveyed them up through yesterday, and we sort of asked them, what would be your first, second, and third choice, with option 1 being operational and capital in November, option 2, operational in November, capital in April 2021, and option 3, operation and capital in April 2021. And you can see, if you look at this graph, that obviously it sort of went 1, 2, 3. The first choice was definitely operational and capital in November. Second choice followed by splitting the two, and the third choice would be putting them all in April. So there was some other information in the survey that they talked about in terms of making sure that we do everything we can, whether it be the elementary school or the middle school, to make sure that we're providing the appropriate supports for not only student academic needs, but student behavioral needs, social emotional needs. and how do we design those facilities to really make that better. So that was also a big key piece that we heard very loud and clear. So with that, I will turn it over to Drew, who is our new Executive Director of Business Services, and he is joining us for his first piece of his workshop, and he'll talk a little bit about sample ballots and tax impact.
Hello, everyone. We've been working with Quarles and Brady, Allison Buchanan with Quarles and Brady, to get a couple sample ballot questions so the board and the community would be able to see how the wording would be. The first one you're looking at is for the operational. So it is a little bit cumbersome because we are joining or combining what are two distinct operational referenda right now into the one. So it would read the 3.95 million in 2021, 2022. And that amount would then change to the just under 8 million moving forward from the 23-24 year through the 29-30 year. So it's not an additional $8 million to the four. It would be the total of those amounts. So it's a total of 4 million the first 2 years, and then a total of just under 8 million for the remainder of the time period. Again, going back to what Dr. Gunlock said, this is a consolidation rather than continuing to go to referendum for the tax for the communities. We're trying to consolidate what we can. Again, the tax impact for this would be zero right now. We're replacing what we currently have out there, so this wouldn't be additional dollars from what we already have in our budgets. And then the second question would be for the capital proposal. The $107 million. And then the description of all the work that we've been discussing. And again, this Allison Buchanan's helped us out with all the verbiage. There's some legal restrictions and parameters that we are bound by with these questions. The tax impact right now, we're estimating at 85 cents. So it would be estimated at $85 a year on a $100,000 home, or just over $7 a month is what we're anticipating at this time.
So once again, we've provided you with a great deal of information here. We're going to open it up to questions coming up here, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. This is the first time that any of you or the community has seen draft ballot questions. And that's sort of when the rubber meets the road, when we start really looking at this. I think some people may be thinking that, you know, the board this evening is going to make a decision on that. The earliest we would recommend that the board would make that decision would be in the July meeting. So this is sort of for consideration to hopefully cultivate some questions on the part of the board. We know this is a very big decision, and we wanted to provide you as well as the Oshkosh community with as much information as we can so that you know what we know as we're trying to put all this together. So I guess with that, I would turn it back over to Dr. Cartwright and Dr. Herzog to, ask or any questions of any of us.
First of all, I want to thank all of you who were involved with this presentation. I know a lot of work went into it, and I know I appreciated having this in the Friday packet to study it, because there's a lot of detail here and a lot of information. So I want to thank everyone who was part of preparing this for this evening. With that, is there someone who would like to kick off the conversation with a question or another comment?
Could we get to the full view, full screen?
Yeah. Can we take off the Dave screen?
There we go.
Thank you. Good idea.
I'll start. On the operational referendum question, that's being, we're redoing the first one until the second one kicks in, then we're doing all of them combined. And it looks like we're still gonna do it for 7 years. What would the response be to somebody that's saying, well, they're gonna be in the same boat 7 years now? Why don't they just make it recurring forever?
That's a great question. We could do that. That is one of the options. That's a recurring. And if you remember the graph that we showed in terms of most of them tend to be non-recurring referenda. I've been involved in both. Those are a little bit more dicey. Remember though, that right now, the way it's written, and that could be changed, they both would sunset in 2030. So it would be 7 years from the end of the second referendum, so it'd really be 9 years from the end of the first referendum. So just a little bit longer, but you certainly could do that. 7 years was picked back in 2014 by just some, surveys that we had done to the community in terms of their tolerance, and 7 years just seemed to be the logical time frame. But there was nothing magic about it. You could certainly do that.
I see a hand up.
Just real quick, Jim. The one slide did indicate the difference between the recurring and non-recurring. And if you'd actually notice statewide, the recurrings only almost had a 50% success rate. There's been some legislation to not allow those going forward as well. I mean, they are still allowed, but in terms of kind of the public perception of kind of a blank check going forward, they typically have a tougher time. So it is a good point, but you probably would face a bigger uphill battle switching to that style.
Bob, Mr. Peschel.
Thank you. Off of Jim's question, it made me wonder, is there a limit of years that can be connected to a non-reoccurring referendum?
I do not believe so, but I would defer to Sue, Drew, Clint. Are you guys aware of any limit?
I mean, like we've had 7 years before. You can do anything. You can either do indefinitely forever, or you can set whatever time limit you put in the referendum question.
So we could say 20 years.
Yep.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Well, while the rest of you are thinking of your questions, I've thought of two. First of all, if the board were to approve something that looks like draft ballot question number 2, and if the voters were to agree to that, when would that mill rate impact the taxes? In what calendar year would that come about?
It would kind of depend on the timing of everything. Let's just say, just to throw something out there, you would go in November. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't actually break ground until April of 2022. So you would probably first borrow money. You would probably do it in 2 or 3 borrowing phases, because you have to spend borrowing proceeds within 2 years. And so you need to time the borrowings out. So you would probably actually break that 107 into either 2 or 3 borrowing. So you probably wouldn't have a tax levy impact until 22, 23.
Thank you. And then my second question.
And I think Clint has something to add to that too.
I'm sorry.
Well, I guess the only thing I'd say is you were right about the groundbreaking for the middle school, but there would be work that first summer for the safety security. So while it wouldn't be a huge borrow, there would be some initially earlier, much earlier than that bigger groundbreaking.
That's true. That's probably why you would do it maybe in 3 borrowings. You do the borrowing for the safety and the security and the vestibules, and then a borrowing for the elementary school and a borrowing for the middle school. But so the first tax impact, though it would be minimal, would probably be 21.
Thank you. And my second question is, in regard to other school districts that have passed referendum for and acquiring debt in terms of building new buildings and so on, there's often a comment made that our tax dollars from Oshkosh are going to support that. What do people mean when they say that?
I'm always really careful to say that
Yes.
because, well, you really, I'll tell you what we mean by that, but then I'll tell you why you have to be careful when you say that.
Please do.
When another district passes a referendum, it usually means that they're going to borrow money. And so then that adds the debt payment and they get state aid on payment of debt. And the pot for state aid is a sum certain. So there's only so much money. So if one district gets more, that means other districts around the state get less. So when another district passes a multi-million-dollar referendum, they start making those debt payments, they start adding more costs, they're going to get more state aid, and the rest of us then technically get a little bit less.
Okay.
So you have to really, the thing you have to be careful about is when we compare ourselves to Neenah. Neenah is a low aid district, which means they're very property rich, they get very little state aid. The more money they spend, the less state aid they get. So, and now that they went to referendum and they're going to be spending more money, they're an exception to the rule of what we've been saying. And you have to be careful because you really can't quantify when we make that statement, even though there's some truth to it, we can't quantify it. If someone turned around and said, okay, what's that impact to Oshkosh? We can't quantify it. So that's why I always suggest that we be careful when we say that. But it is true, when other districts pass referendums and they're going to get more of the state aid pot.
Thank you. And I see Dr. Cartwright had a hand up.
And so correct me if I'm oversimplifying this statement. If you are a property rich district, then the impact as far as the state aid and those type of things is actually, there's not much of an impact for Oshkosh. However, if you are a property poor district, similar to what people would say around our general region, maybe Fond du Lac as well as Oshkosh, then at that point in time, we would actually benefit because of that fact. Is that, I know it's an oversimplified statement, but is that in essence what you're saying?
I mean, if we go to referendum and we're successful, we benefit because yes, we will definitely get more state aid in the subsequent year from when we make our first debt payment.
Right, and the fact, so for example, with Fond du Lac, they're also property poor, correct?
Yes, they're about the same as we are.
Okay, and because we have not gone to referendum on this just yet, but Fond du Lac had and has a past one, and both districts are property poor, some of the tax dollars that are being paid for from Oshkosh residents are going towards that debt repayment in Fond du Lac, correct?
Technically, yes. But if someone said to you, quantify that, we couldn't. But yes, that is an accurate statement. Of all of the taxes that the people in Oshkosh pay, all goes to the state of Wisconsin, then that gets redistributed out. Fond du Lac is going to get a little bit bigger chunk because they passed a referendum and we have not.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And I will be careful in my wording.
I think what people would say is, where on my tax bill does that show? And there is nothing on that tax bill that shows what we're talking about. But it's a bigger picture.
And I think you are correct, Jim. And again, I'm going to lean on you, Sue, to make sure I'm saying this correctly. The reason is it's not necessarily going to show up on your property tax bill, but probably more on your Wisconsin income tax.
Yes, that would be accurate because your property tax bill, what you pay in property taxes to the school district of Oshkosh stays here in Oshkosh. But you pay a small percentage of your property taxes goes to the state of Wisconsin, and then all of your income taxes go to the state of Wisconsin. And those are the monies that are distributed out to other districts through the state aid formula.
Are there other questions or comments regarding this workshop item? This is a major issue. Mrs. Garner?
You know, I'd read through all the slides and I'm appreciative of the presentation tonight, because I think I vacillate, you know, back and forth given what's gone on with COVID and the kids being out of school and talking to parents. And what I think hit me tonight and kind of where I'm sitting or what I'm sitting in is the chart that showed the, you know, what would everybody have us do at this time? Would they have us do everything in November or split it or do everything in April? And I think when the community shares their input with us, I think it's really wise when we follow that input. So I think that's kind of where I've landed tonight. I just wanted to share that with you guys and thank everybody for the presentation ahead of time and then again going through it tonight. Thanks, Barb.
Mrs. Olmsted?
Off of what Allison just said, that chart where it says that the community wants to go with, I'm trying to find it right now, with it all in November, was that just for Oshkosh for education or was that a community? That chart, I can't see it in.
No, Kelly, that's a very good question, and it's one that I was going to bring up anyways. We just surveyed O4E, the people who we had presented some information to, basically a synopsis of the June 10th board meeting, and to date there were 10 people of probably 20 who were on O4E who responded. So you know,
that chart. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, well, I'm just saying, in terms of, I would not want to represent that chart as a community-wide survey. It was
Right.
a quick check. And what we had done with O3 is we said, here's what you told us. Here's the pros and cons of each of the three options that were in the slides you saw tonight. Would you give a rank order your 1, 2, 3 and give us any other input you have? And that's where that chart came from.
Right, because it's not in my packet, so I was just looking at it. So from what I understood, that was just like 10 people from
Yeah.
O4E. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Another question I had was when I read draft ballot question number 2, and I know that we have to stay within certain guidelines for, you know, for laws and you know, what we can and cannot put on a ballot. My fear with question number 2 is if we, when we, you know, whatever we may do, that is literally just talking about, that referendum is just talking about building a school and building 2 schools. It doesn't talk about the consolidation. It doesn't talk about closing other schools. It doesn't talk about the structure that we want to put. It doesn't break it down. It's just talking about the you know, when you look at the chart of where that money is going, we have 3 different places where that money is going. On that draft ballot question, it only talks about one of the spots. So do we have to put them all in? So my question, I guess, is twofold. So we're talking about going to referendum for safety and security, a new elementary, a new middle, and then infrastructure. But in that question, it's only covering the 2 schools. It's not putting in there about the safety and security. That's not putting in there about the infrastructure projects. So it's not the whole 107 million. So is that question too specific? Because it doesn't talk about closing other schools. It doesn't talk about consolidation. So my worry is if somebody is going to I would hope this would not happen, but if somebody goes to the polls and they have not been listening, or we have not caught somebody, or we haven't been able to catch somebody or educate them, they're going to read that question and all that question says is we're building 2 new schools. And somebody's going to be like, nope, or yes. So I have a problem with question number 2, I guess. You know,
Well, the last line does say district-wide building infrastructure, safety and security improvements, and the acquisition of furnishings, fixtures, and equipment. So
Okay.
it does have that part in it.
Okay.
You're only supposed to put in the question what you're actually going to use the money for.
Okay.
And you're not using the money to close other schools. So I would just be careful You know, we can wordsmith this a little bit and, excuse me, and bounce it off legal counsel, but you really have to be careful because the question is really only supposed to be directed at what you're spending the borrowing money for.
Okay, okay.
And Kelly, your
So
question.
I guess my thing is I read that question and it does have those in there, Sue, but way at the end where I didn't even catch that. Like I read that question like 4 or 5 times and I didn't catch that. So I wonder if it's just how it's worded that I didn't, you know, when I go back and I look at it, the infrastructure and the security, it covers it all. But I guess it's just, to me, all it screams is building 2 new schools. And if people don't know what we're all doing, you know.
So one of the things we've done to get at that is we've sent the question, we've been working with Barb Nickel, who we worked with last time in terms of how do we communicate things. And we had her wordsmith those 2 questions to try and make them easier to understand, because sometimes ballot questions can get a little, they just don't read right. Now that may not be legal to do. That's why we take the things that are easy to understand and hand it to the bond counsel and say, how do we, can we word it this way? Is this legal to do? When it comes to the actual impact of all of this, this is inextricably tied to the work of the Facility Advisory Committee. And our job going forward, once the board makes a decision and determines whether we are or are not going to go to referendum and what for specifically, at that moment as an administrative team, we pivot and we move from recommend to inform. And our job, our number one job between that moment and November is going to be talking to anyone who will listen to us and explain to them the entire picture. And that includes, this is phase 1 of 4. This is where all of this came from. And I think that's going to be our marching orders. We're well prepared to do that. We'll do that. We'll do what we do best and teach. And we'll be doing it over and over again, as often as we're allowed. So you hit it right on the head. We'll address that.
Okay. One more thing was, if we don't go to referendum, or if we do and it doesn't pass, what is the money? Do we have any dollar amount about what the maintenance is going to cost on? I mean, we did, and we have those charts from a while ago. I did see any of them in here about what needs to be maintenance and how important they are. Has that been updated, not updated, but looked at, like if we go to referendum and it doesn't pass, or if we don't go to referendum, this is what our maintenance bill would be and what the difference is. Like how much of that would we have to spend in year 1 or over the next 7 years, or, you know what I mean? Like, I know we had that bill and what it is for each school, but what would it be for that year? So if we had to wait for referendum till next April, what would our maintenance bill be this year if we have to put off a referendum, a capital referendum for 2 years? Do we have any numbers on that, like what that might look like?
Well, I think part of that might be, again, it's a little bit of a turn left or turn right? If you're going, if the plan is that we're going to just continue to operate in those buildings and it's 5, it's 10 years, then you're probably going to look at it a little bit differently versus if the plan is just to push the referendum off, then you're probably only going to do the sort of Band-Aid type fixes moving forward, right? So if for example, if the boiler goes out, right, we have to address the boiler, but we'd probably be a little more reactionary than proactive to it. Okay. So,
thank you.
So I think it's a little hard to define what that cost would be, because I think it would be a little bit more of that nature that we don't know, but we know we're likely to, there's probably something that's going to come down the pipeline that we'll have to address.
Okay, thank you, Clint.
The other part of that, if I can add, is there's the electrical boxes, and maybe Clint, you can talk more intelligently about this than I did. I know there's part of that infrastructure cost is that whole electrical project with North and West, and that the city is redoing those. I can't think of the word right off the top of my head, and I don't remember what that dollar amount is. I know that Jim was working on getting a sharpening his pencil and getting a better estimate, but that's something we have to look at if we don't go to referendum.
Yeah, Jim has probably a little bit better insight, unfortunately, than I do on that. I believe it has a little bit to do with the ownership of those transformers and upgrading the service. And then as a result, I think right now, my understanding is I believe the district has ownership of that. And in a typical situation, the utility company would actually have the ownership of that. So subsequently, if something would happen to that, they would be on the hook for repairs versus now you guys are on the hook if something bad happens there.
That's absolutely correct.
The other thing that might be wise is instead of getting into a guessing game of when a key system is going to fail in these, which is going to be hard to predict. We didn't predict what happened with Smith necessarily. So, think about that for a moment. But what we can do is, Clint, how do we, and I forget the number and I don't want to misstate it, but the amount of repairs we need to put into Merrill, what was the total amount from that study in 2017?
It was right around 12 million. I think it was a bit over 12. And I want to say that Webster, again, from memory, was somewhere between 7 and 8. So again, I apologize if I'm misquoting that, but I think I'm pretty close.
And that wasn't fair for me to hit you with that right out of the gate, but just kind of that idea of their dollar. If we are going to keep these facilities, there's some pretty significant monies we would have to put into them for things. And when we are done with them, they're still going to physically look and operate the same way they do today. And we will have just put a lot of money in them.
My question for that was because we had 3 different options. So I wanted to know if we go with one of the, so we were given 3 options. Where do you want to go? So my question was, if we chose option 3, which is pushing it out, how much maintenance would we have to, are we wasting money then with maintenance for those 2 years, 3 years? Why we wait to do a referendum? That was my point, is that even if we wait longer, then we're still having to maintain these buildings for those many years, especially Merrill. So that was my question, was how much money are we going to have to spend for a couple of years if we wait and hold that off? Kind of where I was going, where I was worried about that.
So it sounds to me like there could be some very expensive Band-Aids that would have to be purchased for what would seem like a short-term project. And then if that money isn't built into the budget, we would have to take it from somewhere else. Programs or fund balance or reduce staff or cut programs, and none of those are desirable. Is there anyone else who has a question or a comment? There's a lot to think about. I think Mrs. Carlin's hand went up first and then Mr. Evans, or at least that's the order I saw them. So I'll go with that.
Thank you, Barb. I just had a question about the Facility Advisory Committee. Have they had a chance to meet since COVID hit?
No, they have not met since I think our final meetings were at the end of 2019 when they presented to the board. We did send them a communication sort of outlining what we were doing tonight and giving them an update and access to the information from the FAC website, the slides, everything, just kind of saying, hey, here's where we're at. The board's getting closer to a moment when they're going to be making a choice.
And Mr. Evans.
Okay. One of the reasons why this would be a good time to go is that we're at historically low interest rates. When would those interest rates kick in? We mentioned we'd be doing 3 phases of taxing on the referendum. What are all 3 of those going to be different interest rates depending on what happens with the market?
They could, and just coincidentally, I have Michelle Weinberg from PMA is on the line because she's here ready for the refinancing later on in the agenda, but she could probably answer that question if you don't mind, Michelle.
I don't mind at all. So I think the earliest you would lock in for the first phase would be first quarter of 2021 if you were to go to referendum in November of 20. So first quarter of 2021, we would probably do the first phase. And to get to the question that came up earlier, the tax impact then would hit 21, 22. So it would be the tax bills that are received in December of 21.
So on the whole 107 million,
Each subsequent phase, you would be subject to the interest rate environment when that was done.
so
So
you could potentially have 3 different or more different interest rates.
correct.
Are there other questions or comments? Mrs. Carlin?
Hi, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Oh, you're good.
I had a follow-up question regarding the FAC. Is there a way to pull them and make sure we still have their support? Because we know that our situation has not changed. We still need buildings, we still need new schools. But do we still have their support? Have things changed so that they are not going to support a referendum or not? Is there a way to contact them and get that feedback?
We potentially could. It's pretty easy for us to do that. My guess is they probably, from the few people who responded to the email, they were excited we were moving down this path. So I don't think we're going to see a major shift, but we could certainly do that. That would not be.
Well, my concern is just that the whole world has changed so much in just the past few months. And, you know, we hear people saying, oh, homeschooling was so great, we don't even need buildings anymore. And I do not agree with that, of course. But, you know, I think if we don't address those viewpoints and concerns, then we could potentially have a tough sell ahead of us.
Well, the other thing that we need to communicate to is the fact that this project is it'll be built in 4 years. It'll be financed over 20 years and we'll use it over 100 years. So making sure that people understand that, you know, we're really trying to we're doing a long range thing here when everybody's kind of thinking short range. So that's going to be a piece we have to communicate.
Dr. Cartwright, I believe I saw your hand up.
While we have not surveyed our community, our parents yet, and it won't be happening until towards the later part of July, doesn't mean that we have not looked at the responses from districts that have surveyed their parents about what their intentions are for coming back. Based off what we're seeing, overwhelmingly, a majority of parents are planning on, they want schools to be open back up face to face. So I want to kind of put that out there as well. For the parents want to be able to go back to work, and we respect that, understand that.
I have received personally in the last 3 or 4 days requests to speak with a grandparent of primary age children, two grandparents of at least 3 elementary age children in the district and 1 mother with an elementary age child. And they all are most eager to have their children and grandchildren back in school. And that was a loud message today at the state capitol. I wasn't there physically, only virtually. But that was a loud message from DPI, the WIAA, the organization that represents private and independent schools, the superintendent's group, the the school board group. They all want children in schools. And it's not just those organizations, it's the parents of the children behind them. And many comments related to the social and emotional components that the school provides that is difficult to replicate in your home with 1 child at 1 grade level. So they all felt it was in the best interest of children, at least those who spoke today, to get the children in school, as did the approximately 13 committee members who were there. I didn't mean to squelch conversation with that comment. Is there anyone else who wished to speak or make a comment? Mrs. Olmsted.
I wanted to make a comment too about the homeschooling and the online schooling. so I've talked to some other friends and family members and throughout the state. And I want to give a kudos to our past referendums, and especially what they did for one-on-one, and how we have all these Chromebooks, and how we've done our school district such a service with those. I've been looking and researching numbers around the state a lot, and I've gotten some feedback from different areas, lots of different areas within my family and my circle and friends. And I know that with having our Chromebooks and having all of our things lined up with online learning, we were at a participation rate. Tell me if I'm wrong or right, Dr. Cartwright, we're like between like 93, 94% that we had participation rate. I know I'm not going to name districts, but I know of districts that I've looked numbers up and I've heard things that there was high schools and certain elementary schools in certain districts that they only had like a 24% participation rate online learning, that their children only were able to participate 24%, and 32% was another high school, and some other percentages. And according to some other members of my family who are really involved in things, Oshkosh is Dr. Gunlock nailed it, that Oshkosh is looked at as one of the leading districts in the state for online learning and our IT and what we've done already, and following and always being the leader in those. I think we can absolutely feed off of that. I think we've been a great, and it's absolutely all of our teachers and our IT teams, and everybody that's done everything in Dr. Gunlock's leadership in that role. It's been amazing, and the compliments I'm getting from all these districts that I know and some other places, it's just been amazing. So I want to lead though in every area. So we're known to do really well in that area, but on the other side, we are absolutely known to have the oldest schools. We are absolutely known to not be forward thinking in other areas. So although we're doing fantastic in one area, like we are literally leading the way, wouldn't that be great to continue that? And the only reason that we were able to do that is because of the referendum, and our community gave us that opportunity to have our one-on-one initiatives and our one-on-one learning. So we had in our hands, easily accessible, to do what we needed to do for our kids. And we always put students first, and we did put students first. And we had a 94% participation rate. I don't even know anybody in the state that 92%. 93. Okay. That had that, so I just wanted to, when our community stands behind the school district and passes referendums and does that, we really can shake and move our district and become what we want to, what our mission is to be number one and to be leaders. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Kudos to our district, because I was doing a bunch of research for numbers and looking at it because I was curious, and talking to a lot of families and my brothers and sisters of where my nieces and nephews were all over the state, and Oshkosh is the best.
Well, there's a couple things. I just want to say probably more than likely with the district overall, because the participation rate is going to vary from school site to school site, from that. And so when we were talking about like our Canvas, accessibility and that kind of stuff, so that would be more like your secondary schools. I'm waiting right now for someone to give me that information so we can give you an idea on that. But again, it was something that we were very, very proud of. And the second thing to also be aware of, even it's coming forward on a consent resolution, is even the addition of one position in order for us to expand our e-academy program. Whereas this year we did it in high school, next year we were slated to do it for grades 6 through 12. Now, pending board approval, it's looking as though now we'll be able to provide that online virtual environment K-12. So it's a great expansion. And again, it's one of those moves that's going to continue to push Oshkosh as being innovative, which is part of our vision and mission, and really being in the front ends of these things. And Ms. Carlin, also to address some of the concerns that you're talking about previously.
Also, it's important to remember that at the heart of our innovation has been our teachers. We went ahead and put some things in place to remove the limitations, but they're the ones who ran with the ball. And the positive things you're hearing are certainly part, we put things in place with them, but it's been their creativity and natural talent. So kudos to our teachers.
And it starts with leadership and vision, and Dr. Gunlock, you've provided both, so thank you. Other questions or comments? Dr. Cartwright.
Our average login rate was rounding up 93%.
Very good. All right, any other comments or questions on this workshop item? I don't want to cut off conversation, but on the other hand, if we've exhausted this for tonight, I know this would come back in a July board meeting, which is right now slated for July 15th. Are there any other questions or comments tonight? I don't see anyone. Oh, Mrs. Szilagyi.
Sorry, it's a habit to just raise my hand briefly, but in video I need to be more bold. I just have one question that also may come out a little more as a comment. But I remember when the Facilities Advisory Committee met, one of their recommendations, I mean, it wasn't one in a bullet point, but just something they expressed to us that would help us is if we got people into the Merrill School building. They were under the impression that the more we let the public into our buildings to see how old they are and how much Band-Aid work they might need, the more successful we'd be at building support for just new buildings. So with the COVID situation, I guess I'm just wondering, is that going to be a possibility? Will we maybe do like a Zoom through the building, or maybe these details haven't been thought out, maybe they're not important, but that's been sitting with me as I think about how our current climate maybe will impact the referendum going forward.
That's something that we can definitely take into looking at. It may be that we set up virtual tours of our facilities so that people can do it through like a virtual type environment. I'm sure Dr. Gunlock's loving me for that right now, but just to set it up in a virtual way, because to be very frank with you as it is today, if you had to ask me for a decision as it stands today, the answer would be we are going to be limiting people coming into our facilities even once school starts, though we're really trying to shoot for that face-to-face in-person education starting in September. That does mean that we're going to have to limit people coming into the facilities because we're going to, as much as possible, to have common, consistent groups together. And when you introduce somebody from the outside who's outside of those groups, you expand the opportunity, the potential to have a negative impact.
Now what we can do, because part of it is rather than just taking a camera and going through the building, I mean, it's going to look like it looks, but what really is impactful is when you see it in its natural environment is when our kids are there. And so that if we were going to do that, I would probably try and we don't know how school's going to start, but if we're fortunate enough to have our kids in the school, I think getting some photos and video of that to try and give people a sense would even be better. So, that's certainly something we can look at.
I've attended a couple of virtual meetings where there were some real estate folks involved, and they've talked about how different their work is, their jobs are since mid-March, and how they are using much more video, which I think ties in with what Mrs. Szilagyi said. And they're selling houses that people never set foot in. They see everything in a video way. So I think there is some potential here to post on Facebook or post on our website and have a virtual tour with or without students, but to drive that point home. I know before the referendum passed for Oak Lawn School, I don't know the exact year, maybe 2011 or 12. There were tours, but there were also photographs shown at board meetings showing for example, the restroom, the single stall restroom, which included the storage area for all the FIAD teaching equipment in the building, and the cafeteria, which tripled as the art room, and the gymnasium for that school. So I think Mrs. Szilagyi is onto something. Seeing is believing, and whether it's a virtual tour or some other way of touring or getting the actual information out there would be very helpful. Any other comments or questions?
No, thank you. That I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Good job. Okay, with that, again, we thank those who were involved in this presentation tonight. We'll expect to have this brought back to the board for the July 5th meeting. If in the meantime, any members of the public or anyone here tonight has any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact Dr. Gunlock. Is that the appropriate person? And we'll go from there. All right, thank you very much. Then moving on to our next agenda item.
And Dr. Herzog, just a quick clarification, but just in case somebody is listening very close, the next board meeting is on July 15th. Thank you.
Thank you. And I seem to have done a good job of misplacing my agenda again. I'm really good at that. Too much paper. Okay, I know it's resolutions, but I'm sorry, bear with me. I can't say my dog ate my homework because he's nearby, but not right here. All right, I'm sorry, I am not finding my.
Dr. Herzog, I'm going to send you a picture of it just to help facilitate the meeting.
That would be good. I don't have to move and I can lose paper faster than anyone I know.
It'll take just a moment.
I'm sorry.
No.
Oh, wait a minute. I think I have it. I do. I've got it. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on then. We have the consent resolution agenda. For the consent agenda, the board has been furnished with background information or material on each item and has discussed it at a previous meeting. These will be acted upon with one vote without discussion. If a board member wants to discuss any item, it will be pulled out of the consent agenda and will be voted on separately. 5B will be pulled. Are there any other agenda items that anyone would like to pull? Any other agenda items? Mrs. Olmsted.
Could I have 12 pulled just so that we can be talk about those new positions?
Absolutely. Any others? All right. So the board will consider approval of 1, minutes of the May 27th, 2020 regular board meeting, 2, minutes of the June 10th, 2020 regular board meeting, number 3, minutes of the June 10th, 2020 executive session of regular board meeting. Number 4, bills payable. Number 5, personnel. A, appointments, resignations, and salaries. C, waiver of 30-day notice. D, resignation of an administrator. E, waiver of 30-day notice. 6, Neola policy update A, policy 6116, time and effort reporting. Number 7, secretary/deputy clerk of the board change. 8, 2019 to 2020 budget changes. Number 9, early learning partnership agreements. Number 10, WIAA annual membership renewal. Number 11, CISA 6 contract. And number 13, resolution authorizing the issuance and establishing parameters for the sale of not to exceed $16 million general obligation refunding bonds, series 2020.
So moved. Kat Olmsted.
Second, Evans.
Second was Evans. Please call the roll, Mrs. Collins.
Carlin,
Aye.
Carlin, I, Evans,
Aye.
Evans, I, Garner,
Aye.
Garner, I, Herzog,
Aye.
Herzog, I, Olmsted,
Aye.
Olmsted, I, Peschel,
Aye.
Peschel, I, Szilagyi,
Aye.
Szilagyi, I, motion carried.
Thank you very much. We will go back to Resolution 5B. Be it resolved that the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education approve the retirements as filed with the Secretary to the Board of Education.
So moved. Olmsted.
Second, Salaji.
Thank you. Once again, I had asked that we take a moment to recognize two longstanding members of our staff. Jana Brayton Gaffney has been a literacy resource teacher for a long time. She's currently at Franklin Elementary School and is retiring after 23 years of service. In addition, Tom Schrei, a grade 5 teacher currently at Reed Elementary School, is retiring after 30 years of service to the district. We certainly want to wish both of these individuals well. They've served our children, put with our guiding principle of students first, and we wish them all the best for a long, healthy, and happy retirement. Any other comments? Mrs. Collins, please call the roll.
Evans,
Aye.
Evans, I. Garner,
Aye.
Garner, I. Herzog,
Aye.
Herzog, I. Olmsted,
Aye.
Olmsted, I. Peschel,
Aye.
Peschel, I. Salaji,
Aye.
Salaji, I. Carlin,
Aye.
Carlin, I. Motion carried.
Thank you. Next then is resolution number 12. Be it resolved that the Oshkosh Area School District Board of Education approve the personnel positions, including 1.0 FTE elementary E Academy teacher coach, student coach slash teacher, 3.0 FTE health assistants, an increase from 0.5 to 1.0 FTE account clerk, 1 bookkeeper, and read that again, an increase from 0.5 to 1.0 FTE account clerk 1 / bookkeeper, and 1.5 FTE 4K early childhood positions as filed with the Secretary to the Board of Education.
So moved. Olmsted.
Second? Is there a second?
Second, Evans.
Thank you. Mrs. Olmsted, I believe you asked to pull this one. So let's begin with
Yep,
the,
I just wanted for transparency, because these are new positions. I would specifically for the elementary E Academy, and then for the health assistants, why we're bringing them, and the bookkeeper. Because I know that they have to do with the coronavirus and getting the kids back into school. So I just wanted to have that explained a little. That's all.
thank you.
Certainly, and I can have staff step in if needed in order to supplement anything that I may miss on this. But what we're looking at is, I'll start with the health assistants, is that currently we do not have a full-time health assistant at every one of our schools. With the understanding of what some of the things that we are going to have to implement in order to create as safe of an environment as possible, we are looking to increase our health assistants so that we at least have one full-time person per school. Mr. Kamer, anything else on that one?
No, that's correct. And it's not one per school necessarily, it's one per building. So we have a couple of buildings that have more than one school in them, particularly our elementaries and middles that are combined. So we just want to make sure there's a trained health professional in a building at all times in the event they have to deal with anything that may come up related to COVID.
Awesome.
Thank you. Ms. Conrad, the E Academy.
Absolutely. So as mentioned earlier, our Oshkosh Area School District E Academy last year had successfully had 7 students complete a full-time online schedule. We were ready to expand down to middle school, but given our COVID-19 situation and our families and our community asking for additional options, especially having options of going 100% virtual right from the beginning of school if they choose not to come to school face-to-face, we have an elementary option for our students. And so in preparation for that, we need to make sure that we have the staffing and the support for students in K-5. In addition to that, we have currently taken our open enrollment list, and we are inviting any families that have open enrolled out to virtual charter schools to come to Oshkosh. Maybe you didn't know that we had this opportunity, and we're inviting you back in. They are our students within our boundaries. We're inviting you back in, and we will also be advertising and letting families know that we do have this 100% full-time option for students in K through 12. But to make that happen, we need that 1.0 FTE in order to be able to support our elementary students.
Thank you, Ms. Conrad. If I can please call on Ms. Perron related to the increase from half to a full FTE for our bookkeeper.
I believe Drew would be the person to call on. I can give you background about the 0.5 was paid specifically out of special ed to get our federal grant funds in line. We also look to maximize our Medicaid reimbursements. We are looking for a full-time position because there is a great deal of grants that run through our title funds, in addition to new grant rules and grants that we get for CARES Act and other ways to manage those funds, and also maximize our reimbursements in a timely manner, if that makes sense. Drew probably has more to add. I did the original job description and kind of came to him and thought there are better ways for us to manage money. And now that there's a new sheriff in town with Drew, just kind of looking at how we maximize our reimbursements and use special ed funding to the maximum extent possible, which will be roughly half of the position. Drew, I don't know what you want to add.
Yeah, I'll just follow up with that and kind of piggyback what was being said with talking with the business office staff. There's also some opinions that there's too many hands from all the different titles and the special ed in commingling with the bookkeeping right now. So to really clean the bookkeeping up and the grants process up, it really makes sense to have one person who's truly in charge of all of the accounting with all of those. And again, it's going to get paid by the grants. Even going to a 1.0, we'll have all this between the title grants and the special ed grants that we have. That's going to fund the position, so it's not coming out of new district operational funds. But it is a way to consolidate what we have now into one position with one person to kind of clean everything up and make the auditing of all of these different grants a much more seamless process for the business office.
And Dr. Brown, if you will possibly explain the 1.5 positions for the 4K early childhood teachers. And as she's queuing up on this, I'll see if there she is. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we are taking, the Christian community is a site that we are no longer going to be working with. And so we are using teachers then at Webster and UW Oshkosh and using those places as the programming for these programs. And so we're just moving the teachers that we were paying the sites for and utilizing those funds to pay for our own teachers and paraprofessional at some of those sites, at the new sites.
And to be noted for the board is that the cost of the additional positions is actually cost beneficial to cost neutral for the school district. During this past school year, the school district paid approximately $198,000 to Christian community, and with us eliminating that site, the cost of the requested positions is approximately $120,000, and that includes salary and benefits.
Thank you, everyone.
Any other comments or questions on this one? Mrs. Collins, please call the roll.
Garner?
Aye.
Garner, aye. Herzog?
Aye.
Herzog, aye. Olmsted?
Aye.
Olmsted, aye. Peschel?
Aye.
Peschel, aye. Szilagyi?
Aye.
Szilagyi, aye. Carlin?
Aye.
Carlin, aye. Evans?
Aye.
Evans, aye. Motion carried.
Thank you very much. So we just finished individually considered resolutions. Next agenda item is request for future agenda items. Dr. Cartwright, I believe you had an agenda item you wanted to suggest.
I'm in process of still confirming all of that information, but I'll definitely, once I have that concluded, make sure that we make a public notice.
All right, very good. Are there any announcements? I've been struck tonight by the presence of a number of people appearing on my screen and yours as well, I hope. Mrs. Schnorr, I'm not sure how many meetings you have left with us, but certainly we're going to miss you moving forward. I know you have some vacation coming up, but you'll always be welcome here. You can always come visit. And then Mrs. Collins. I know I don't always say Mrs. Collins before I ask, please call the roll, but it just seemed like the right thing to do tonight. And since we've approved your replacement, that was a unanimous vote. I wasn't sure, if we were going to really let you go or not, but Mrs. Collins is counting down the number of meetings she's going to be attending with us. So we want to thank her for her ongoing years of service. And again, we're going to miss her, and certainly she can come back and help us out. I'm not sure how I'm going to get through some of these meetings because you always kept me on the straight and narrow with Robert's rules. But we also are welcoming your replacement. So I don't know if you or Dr. Cartwright would like to introduce your replacement to the board, but this would be a great time to do that.
I would be honored if Teresa, Ms. Collins, would go ahead and introduce your replacement to us.
Certainly. This is Jackie Jason, and she started on Monday. So we have been working together this week, and I believe that I am placing you in very capable hands.
Excellent. Did you want to say anything, Jackie?
Sorry, just look forward to working with all of you in the future here, and hopefully I can keep you in line as Teresa has with the Robert's Rules and Order. So I'm looking forward to this new adventure. It's been wonderful so far, and everyone is just so nice here in this office. So I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Not surprised, but it's always good to hear that. We have a great staff. We truly have a great staff. So again, thank you to Mrs. Collins and Mrs. Schnorr. I don't know how many more meetings we'll have you in your official capacities, but you will truly be missed. So thank you for your contributions, and we wish both of you all the best in retirement for long, happy, and healthy days and years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that then, are there any other announcements tonight? All right, then moving on, we will adjourn to executive session. For number 1, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session under Wisconsin statute 19.85.1C. A, purchase of property. 2, Oshkosh Education Association, OEA, negotiation strategies. C, Oshkosh Paraprofessional Employee Association, OPEA, negotiation strategies. D, Non-Teaching Employee Association, NTEA, negotiation strategies. And 2, considering the employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility under Wisconsin State Statute 19.85.1C, Wisconsin Statutes A, superintendent contract.
Moved by Evans.
Second, Olmsted.
Mrs. Collins, please call the roll.
Herzog?
Aye.
Herzog, aye. Olmsted?
Aye.
Olmsted, aye. Peschel?
Aye.
Peschel, aye. Szilagyi?
Aye.
Szilagyi, aye. Carlin?
Aye.
Carlin, aye. Evans?
Aye.
Evans, aye. Garner?
Aye.
Garner, aye. Motion carried.
Thank you very much. everyone. Have a, well, like we are going into executive session. So those of you, we have to sign out from this particular meeting and then sign into the new Zoom meeting for those of us who will be continuing on with that. The rest of you, please have a great night and a wonderful weekend coming up.